All right, welcome back. Hope you had a great weekend, or if you're getting ahead, hope you're having a great weekend, or whatever day you're on. We're almost finishing up, so we have today. I was actually wrong on the schedule. We have today, we have tomorrow, and then we'll have a test review and the test. And I'll make the test. I'll email you guys, or I'll put it on there on the review when the test will be going. So we'll only have a couple more video lectures. I know that's depressing for a lot of you. Before we get in, we're going to finish up just on some news numbers and some news things that we have. I wanted you to see this little video, and you guys may have seen it, but I love it. It's a great example of being prepared for you don't know what's going to happen. It's interesting to me because when my daughter was growing up, my daughter's about y'all's age. She's a little bit younger probably than most of you. We did this great thing where we ordered and we got the caterpillars and we kept them in this netting thing and we kept them for weeks and weeks and weeks and they turned into butterflies. We took them out back and we released them. It was great. And then I saw this video and I thought it was awesome. So let's watch it. So I actually loved how the lady was hoping there until the end. She pries open the dog's mouth and she's like, oh, it's gone. He ate the butterfly. I think butterflies only live 3 days anyway, so it really wasn't that big of a deal, but just kind of fun. And you have to be prepared, right? You don't know. Sometimes your butterfly is going to get eaten. You don't know when somebody's going to eat the butterfly. And when you're electronic media, you better be ready for that. That might be, years from now, you'll see a book that I wrote and said, Who Ate My Butterfly? That might be a good name of a book going forward. But be prepared, be ready for that. So let's finish up. I want to talk to you about just a couple other things about news. I've got some more research numbers to show you that we'll ask test questions about. I've just been dropping test questions left and right in our lectures over the last couple of days. So hopefully, again, this can be the first time ever I do this where the test has almost been completely written on its own. So be ready for that. And I'll give you some of that in the test review as well. But let's look at some of these numbers as we have going forward. And I finished up on the slide presentation talking about just issues that we have in news management and where we are now. What we're talking about here doesn't have anything to do with that. That's where we ended up, race and ethnicity issues. Remember that, dealing with unions. Some of these things we definitely will ask on the test, but there have been some what are called seminal moments in news and the change of news coverage or big news events and going forward that have changed maybe the scope of how we're dealing with news as an industry. So the first one was in 1963 when John F. Kennedy, the president, was assassinated in Dallas. All of a sudden, there became a true focus on television news coverage. We didn't have that in the past. In the past, newspaper really took the lead on most of these things, but television was the leader on this, and that started in 1963 with the assassination of JFK right here in the state of Texas in Dallas. Fast forward to 1968, Walter Cronkite, if you don't know who he is, he's one of the most famous news anchors we've ever had, worked for CBS. He was really trusted by people. They called him Uncle Walter. That was his nickname. And he went out. He went to Vietnam, boots on the ground. That was unheard of at the time. Now we see that all the time, embedded news coverage. And he was really against the war. And he reported a lot of things that he felt like were negative about the war. And we started seeing then, hey, that the public opinion can be swayed by news anchors and news personnel and news people. And we're really seeing that now. It's really a negative now, but back then it was a changing moment, a defining moment in news coverage. In 1969, we saw again the power of television and how people can be swayed and view television. Here's the Pope. I showed you a Pope on the first day, and I'm showing you a Pope here near the last day. And they wheeled the television in, and he watched live as man landed on the moon. And again, newspaper can't do that. Radio can't do that. Internet can do that now. You can watch those things now, but at the time, uh, that was something that very different as far as news coverage goes. 1974. If you ever seen the movie The Post, you should see it. It was about the Pentagon Papers, not about Watergate, but it showed you where newspapers were at that time. And I think newspapers had a defining change around then, and that was realizing that they can really get into investigative reporting much more maybe than television or radio. And so Watergate was a defining moment in that. And again, their coverage, the New York Times and the Washington Post coverage, forced the resignation of a president, and because of what they're reporting and what they went through. 1979 was the Iran hostage crisis. This was when Jimmy Carter was the president, and debuted a show called Nightline, and that was started out just being a show. Ted Koppel, you see him there in the corner. He basically said, "Hey, we're going to do this show every night after the news, after your local news, just to update you on what's going on in Iran, and we're not going to stop until the hostages were released." Well, however many days later, when the hostages were released, and it was in 1981 after the Ronald Reagan was inaugurated as president. Then the show was so successful, so many ratings, people watching it, they kept it. They kept the show on. But at the time, so that started kind of late night news coverage. 1986, I remember exactly where I was. There was a disaster on live television when the space shuttle crashed or exploded right on live television. We're all watching it. And think about this as well. There was a teacher on that shuttle and students watching it. And again, if we went back to the Pope, there were still at that time people wheeling televisions and other things into classrooms, and we all got to witness it, and we saw exactly how powerful television coverage can be. In 1987, they had a change in the Fairness Doctrine, and the Fairness Doctrine basically it points that if you present one side of an issue, you have to present the other side of an issue. Well, that doctrine was basically relaxed in '87, and so we saw a proliferation of talk radio and opinionated talk radio. Looking at Rush Limbaugh, that started to really take off and expand because they could really express their views, their dogmas, ideologically one way or the other, and they didn't have to worry about presenting equal time to the other side. And we're still seeing that today. So that was back in 1987 when that first kind of kicked into gear. In 1991, the Persian Gulf War was going on, and again, television realized, hey, we can actually use this as programming. And you see here, I can't remember this guy's name here. It might be Bob Schaefer. He's reporting on his phone, and we saw a phone in that video last week about the internet. So he's calling in for video, but I remember it was crazy. I was married, I'm still married, but at the time, my wife was like, "Hey, let's go home and watch the war tonight on television." It was basically live television coverage. 1994, we had the O.J. Simpson trial, and I'm sure you all know about O.J. And it's come to light recently because of the new show that was on Netflix about it. And television, this is when they relaxed TV cameras in the courtroom, and so all of a sudden now trials in court became fair game to show on television. It used to be that you could put one pool reporter in there, and you'd have an illustrator in there, and somebody that would do drawing sketches every day of what was happening in the courtroom. Now we could watch it live. We could watch it on television, and court TV really took off after that. 1998, President Clinton got caught up in his own scandal with an intern, Monica Lewinsky, and again, we saw that news took kind of an unseemly turn at this time and started covering this kind of a story. When in the past, maybe news would turn away, they wouldn't look at that, they wouldn't cover something that maybe is lewd or something about that's not necessarily what they would consider real news. But because so many news outlets started covering it, you had to keep up. This had to be something that you became a part of. So it was again a bit of a change in the wrinkle of how television covered things. 2001, this was really the attack on New York City and Washington D.C., and then the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. This was really the birth of people going to the internet, and we have a slide. I don't know if we'll get to it or not tomorrow about where they some of the websites couldn't handle. They couldn't handle the amount of people coming to their site to get news, and we had a exercise on the discussion board last week about where you go to get your news coverage, but the message boards and the other things, they couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle that kind of coverage. That amount of traffic, and it crashed a little bit. And so websites and those started thinking, hey, this could really be a case of where we could serve a purpose as far as providing news coverage. And then we saw that in 2007, the shooting at Virginia Tech, the massacre there with the shooter on campus. Again, the internet was a little more people. Really, that's a big news event where people did go to the internet and go to where they felt really comfortable to get their news. And so we saw a change there in 2007. Now, again, that's been 11 years, and there's been some other things since then, but those were more of the big moments. But I want to show you again some of this Pew Research, and again, all of these slides are will be in that folder for chapter 10, from chapter 10 for test number 3, that you can go look at them. But some of these things are interesting to show how social media is now becoming a pathway for news. So as we look at this, 66% of U.S. adults, for example, use Facebook. 45% of adults get their news from the site. It's pretty interesting, right? So think about all the fake news and all the other things we see on Facebook, and the sheer number of people that are looking at it. Again, the same we see at YouTube. A lot of people get news on YouTube. This Twitter number actually surprises me a little bit. You'd think that would be a larger number. I saw a couple of you wrote that you always go to Twitter to find out news and get your news, but here it's only 11%. And how about this? LinkedIn, 5%. Who uses LinkedIn for that kind of thing? But 5% do. We saw yesterday that traditional legacy media is not really taking advantage of Snapchat, but 18% of adults use Snapchat. 5% of those get their news from Snapchat. Anyway, kind of an interesting dynamic. As we look at the social media news sites, news users, so these are the people who get their news from these social media sites, for example. So 62% of females that get their news from Facebook. So of all the Facebook news viewers, 62% of those are female. But here's the ages. Look at that. 65% of those are between 18 and 49. So it's a younger audience. So as you see, as you get older, you're seeing less and less of that number. 35% have a high school degree, 33% have some college, 32% graduated from college, 65% of those are white, 34% of those are non-white. So 65% of people who get their news on Facebook are younger than 49 years old. So it's trending a little bit younger. So look at YouTube. How about that? 70% of people 49 and younger get news on YouTube. Again, count me as kind of out of the mix on that, because I didn't even know you could get news really on YouTube. Twitter, more males get their news on Twitter, just like on YouTube. You look at Instagram, Snapchat are more female dominated, as is Facebook. And Twitter, it's now 71%, 49 or younger, that use Twitter for news are younger than 49. So 71% of the audience is that way. And look at this. Twitter is a little more of a educated audience. 45% of those users on Twitter have a college degree or higher. 59% white, 39% non-white. But the most interesting thing, when you're looking at minorities or non-white, 68% use Instagram and 73% use Snapchat. So of the users, how about that? So you can look at if you're trying to attract via news, maybe a certain segment, If you have something that you're thinking, okay, this is important to the Hispanic community, you might look at Instagram or Snapchat as a way to go because of their users, of their news users. Uh, Primarily, they are non-white. So just some test questions off of that you can look at, and you could say we're mostly looking at how people use Twitter and Facebook, and to some extent where legacy media is missing the boat. It looks like they are missing the boat on Snapchat. When you look at percentage of each social media site's news users who often get news from, so people who use Facebook, 33% still get their news from local television. 30% of Instagram users get it from local television. Cable television, 24% of Facebook users get their news on cable television. Then you look at all adults down and below. 37% of all adults get their news on local television. 26%, if you look over here to the right, 26% of all adults get their news on network nightly television. Print newspapers, Facebook users only 11% get their news from print newspapers, and it goes down to 5% on Snapchat. You see right here. So you can tell again by this. Younger demos use Facebook, younger demos use Snapchat, and fewer of those using print newspaper as their source of media. The other thing is important to look at here is that Facebook, YouTube, Twitter users, a lot of them get news off of other news websites or applications, and so they're social media users, and they're going to other kinds of digital formats to get their news. About 1 in 4 now get news from multiple social media sites. So as I was looking at some of your answers, you said I go here, then I go here. So 26% in 2017 of adults use 2 or more different social media sites to get news. Twitter, YouTube, and Snapchat have grown a lot since 2016 in portion of users who get news on each site. So Twitter users, the sites where their news usage has increased since 2016. Twitter now 74% get their news on Twitter, YouTube at 32%. So those three, here's a test question for you. Sites, social media sites where news usership increase is occurred, and it's Twitter, YouTube, and Snapchat. And so if you look at Reddit, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, those sites, they've not changed or they've gone down. And so we might do which of the following is not seeing a growth in news usership, and it would be any of those following: Reddit, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, etc. So check that out on your test question. Social media news use among older, non-white, and less educated Americans. So first one is people ages 18 to 49, and then people 50 plus. So social media news usage in the last year has increased 10% for people 50 plus. It stayed about the same for adults 18 to 49. Whites, it stayed about the same, 64%, but non-whites, it's grown from 62 to 74%. Non-whites are finding social media sites as a better place to get news. That's a true-false question. And then college educated, and some college or less, college educated actually has dropped a little bit, 68% to 63%, while some college or less, it's increased from 60 to 69. So people without a college degree or having been a little bit of college are now going more and more to social media to get their news. So again, we'll go back to how people share their news. Facebook news users who also get news on YouTube, 28%. YouTube news users who get their news on Facebook is 68%. So again, you see a lot of people go back to Facebook. Twitter users who also get their news on Facebook, 62%. Instagram users who also get their news on Facebook, 76%. Snapchat news users who also get news on Facebook, 76%. LinkedIn news users who also get news on Facebook, 71%. Reddit news users who also get news on Facebook, 48%. And WhatsApp news users who also get news on Facebook, 92%. So if people are going to multiple sites to get their news, generally Facebook is one of the two sites that they're getting their news from. So again, just different numbers to look at. Make sure you just go back and look at those on your slide when you take test number 3. I'll make those questions as easy as possible. I don't want to give any curve on test 3. I just want good grades and then move on down the road. So do that. Get your assignment 4 turned in and go to the message boards, answer the message boards questions, and we'll see you again tomorrow.